Did India order last June's hit on a prominent Sikh activist outside Vancouver? Canada thinks so. Justin Trudeau's public airing of his spy service's suspicions prompting tit-for-tat expulsions of diplomats in Delhi and Ottawa. We'll ask about the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar and more broadly, the politics at play for a religious minority of 25 million worldwide, most of them in India, with a strong voice in both countries and views that range from moderate to hardline separatist. Could the government of Narendra Modi have really ordered an extraterritorial assassination? India is not the only superpower Canada has to watch. China's recently been accused of pushing expatriates to oppose pro-democracy lawmakers. And Ottawa is always on the lookout for Russian interference, what with its support of its strong and very vocal Ukrainian community in Canada. Beyond just the Canadians, how do diasporas weigh in on politics in their countries of origin? And how do those countries impact where they live? Today in the France 24 debate, the escalating row between Canada and India. Joining us from Vancouver, France 24 correspondent Craig McCullough. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
From New Delhi, Rajat Sethi, political advisor to India's ruling Hindu nationalist BJP party, senior fellow as well at the India Foundation think tank. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
From Bangalore, journalist and writer Amandeep Sandhu, your books include Punjab, Journeys Through Fault Lines. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
And from Lancaster, England, he writes on religion and politics. Amalendu Misra is professor of international politics at Lancaster University. Welcome.
Good evening.
The France 24 debate, where you could join the conversation you have on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The hashtag is F24Debate. We're not looking to provoke or escalate, insists the Canadian Prime Minister this Tuesday. But Justin Trudeau has also told reporters he wants India's government to take this matter with, quote, the utmost seriousness. Emerald Maxwell has more.
A day after his explosive allegations linking the Indian government with the murder of a Canadian citizen, Justin Trudeau tried to diffuse the mounting tensions with Delhi. The Canadian government says it wants to work with India in investigating the assassination of Sikh independence advocate Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who was gunned down in Canada in June. India has rejected the allegations of its involvement.
Allegations of the government of India's involvement in any act of violence in Canada are absurd and motivated.
In a tit-for-tat move, it expelled the Canadian High Commissioner, who declined to comment as he left the Indian Foreign Ministry. Earlier, Canada announced the expulsion of a top member of India's Foreign Intelligence Agency, who'd been serving as a diplomat.
We will do everything we can to shed light on this issue. Secondly, we will protect Canadians at all times. And thirdly, we will protect Canadian sovereignty. And that's also why today I expelled a top Indian diplomat from Canada.
Hardeep Singh Nijjar was wanted by the Indian authorities for terrorism as a strong advocate for an independent Sikh homeland in India's Punjab region. India accuses Canada, which is home to a large Sikh diaspora, of sheltering extremists who threaten India's sovereignty and territorial integrity. In the northern city of Jammu, Indians protested against the Canadian Prime Minister. The spat between the two countries threatens trade ties too, with talks on a proposed deal suspended last week, following tense talks between the Indian and Canadian Prime Ministers at the G20 summit.
Craig McCullough, how much of a surprise was it when Justin Trudeau got up in Parliament and spoke openly about his suspicions?
Well, considering he was trapped in India when his plane broke down just last week and was attending the G20 and said nothing, it definitely grabbed headlines. I got messages from multiple news sources on my phone. Even the Premier of British Columbia, who is the provincial head of government, responded to it. All the opposition leaders in Ottawa stood up and actually were almost agreed with the Prime Minister. And we're in the primitive stages of an election campaign here in Canada. It was rather shocking just to allege that a foreign government committed a criminal act on Canadian soil And that act was murder of a Canadian citizen, and the murder of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil in a major city just compounded the shock across Canada, not just in the local Sikh or Punjabi or South Asian community, but clear across the entire country.
Now, the Reuters news agency, Craig, is quoting a Canadian government source as saying that, first off, Canada worked very closely with the U.S. on evidence, and secondly, it's going to share that evidence in due course. So what more do we know? Why are these suspicions being aired publicly?
Well, the time will definitely tell on that one. The United States of America obviously is, we share the largest border, undefended border in the world is with the United States. It's 30 minutes that way over my shoulder. Just having covered a lot of criminal trials in the past, including the Air India terrorism trial, which was the largest trial I covered, which was charges against two individuals on the bombing of an Air India flight back in 1985, which was all put together here in Vancouver. I can tell you that prosecutors generally, we call them crown prosecutors for the monarchy, generally hold their cards very close to the chest, and they usually are very un-American in the way that they don't splatter it all over the media or give leaks or go to the grand jury. It's usually a very secretive process until the charges are actually laid or until they really have all the I's dotted and T's crossed. Although one would think to stand up in the House of Commons and say such a thing, where you cannot knowingly lie, either in the House of Commons or our Senate, which is an appointed upper body, does tell me and should tell most people that they have a lot of information that they believe. And apparently the British Prime Minister has also been alerted. So we don't quite know how much British intelligence is involved in this as well.
All right, it may have been, just very briefly on this point, Craig, when the killing happened last June, it had the markings of a hit job, what with masked men targeting one person, but we didn't know much more then.
Correct. Canada and Vancouver is like any other major city in the world in North America, and that we do have drive-by shootings. There was one just last week, again, just a couple of kilometers over my shoulder, and then a few minutes later you find a car on fire. This was a bold attack in the parking lot of a major Sikh Gurdwara here in suburban Vancouver. And there's been no follow-up. I haven't heard of anything else, no suspects or anything like that, which is a little bit different. But this was a very bold attack, and this gentleman was one of the leaders in that Gurdwara, and he was very well known throughout the Sikh and Punjabi and throughout the political community in the greater Vancouver area. Very well known.
You mentioned at the outset, Craig, the fact that Justin Trudeau's plane broke down, yet there was no bilateral meeting with Narendra Modi, one of the rare of visiting dignitaries at the G20 summit who did not meet separately. There were handshakes for the cameras between the leaders of India and Canada. But again, no bilateral meeting between that pair. We know, Rajat Sethi, that Canada had decided, we've lost the connection, I think, with New Delhi. We'll try to reconnect in a moment. We know, I'll put it to you, in that case, Amandeep Sandhu. Canada had decided to pause talks on a trade deal with India recently. Did you have suspicions that perhaps this might be in the mix?
Yes, of course there were suspicions, because the pause happened, the news of the pause came before the G20 summit, a day or two before the summit. And the Canadian Prime Minister was flying down, and one wondered, there was no reason given for it. So one wondered if it was linked to this issue, because, or perhaps I wondered, because I look at Punjab closely, whether this was an issue there.
And what do you make of the little that we have so far on this killing?
As little as you do.
Let me put it to you, Rajat Sethi. Did you have a sense during that G20 that there was a problem between New Delhi and Ottawa?
Well, there has been a problem going on as back as 2018, when Trudeau had a failed, rather disastrous visit, a bilateral visit to India. The Punjab chief minister, who happens to be from the opposition party, handed over a dossier to him, saying that there are certain terror outfits which are being harbored and sheltered by the Canadian government red corner notices were being issued against them. And the chief minister of that state requested Justin Trudeau, who was incidentally visiting that state, to take actions against it. So ever since 2018, there has been a coldness in the relationship, but it has reached to rock bottom after this public statement coming in from the Prime Minister of Canada. There are ways in which you speak to potential ally. India is not an enemy state to Canada. We are two thriving democracies. There would have been moments or disputes between two countries, and there are ways in which you respectfully engage. It seems like what Trudeau has done is just cater to his domestic politics. He's running at record low levels of approval ratings, and it may be, for some reason that he's trying to play to the gallery, largely concerning the domestic politics issues, rather than giving good credence to, a friendly ally state like that of India. So it's really unfortunate.
Do you agree, Amalindou Misra, that this is basically Trudeau playing to his gallery at home by raising these suspicions?
Well, what we have seen so far was after this high decibel public announcement that India is involved in the kind of killing of one of the Sikh leaders in Canada, we have seen a kind of toning down of the voice from the Trudeau side when he's saying that his intention is not to provoke India. And moreover, what we have seen is that the Canadian police is now calling for priority investigation and asking for anyone to having any information regarding this killing to come forward. So this is very surprising. And if you have got all the credible evidences, if you're making a very strong case, you should have everything. You shouldn't be asking the public to provide you with information at this stage. That's number one. And second, we also need to look at the current government's position. Justin Trudeau's government has got 157 MPs in the lower house of the parliament, and it remains afloat because of the support that it receives from the New Democratic Party, which is led by mostly the Sikhs. And 13 of them, in fact, have managed to keep Trudeau's government afloat. So there is definitely a domestic side to this particular story. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was playing to the domestic audience. But this is a very serious allegation nonetheless. And if India is indeed found to be involved in this particular hired killing or target killing or whatever you call it, then this is a low point for New Delhi. And it is going to have a repercussion across the international system, especially at a time when India is trying to have a global role.
Amandeep Sandhu?
There are two things here. First, what Rajat said, that the Chief Minister of Punjab at that time did hand over a dossier, and that is true. But we have to backtrack a little bit and see that the Chief Minister of Punjab had not been allowed to enter Canada because of some elements there. And he had a personal grudge against Trudeau. That is why he was doing that. Second, to blame it all on Trudeau's domestic politics is wrong, because for months now, India has been saying that Canada has been fanning hostility in India. And this time, Canada has just said, okay, so you have been fanning hostility here. You killed somebody who is our citizen, and we are taking action. So it is just tit for tat on that level. And the third thing here is really that, BJP government celebrated the Balakot attack on Pakistan, which was a surgical strike. And they earned lots of votes for it in the 2019 elections. What happened now? Why can't they be open and say, yeah, we did it? What is stopping them? That is important to note here.
I'm going to put the question to Rajat Sethi, but first I want to ask a question to Craig McCullough. He was a prominent activist, this Sikh separatist, Hardeep Singh Nijjar. How radical was he? How outspoken was he?
Well, the short answer to that is we don't know because he was not the only one here in Vancouver to have those beliefs, and they would not call themselves separatists. They would call themselves nationalists or people who want a free Sikh homeland. So they would disagree on that terminology. We do have temples, gurdwaras here in Vancouver that are known to be more militant than others. We had a big controversy a number of years ago over tables and chairs because some gurdwaras want tables and chairs for their elders, and others didn't want to, and there was fights in gurdwaras over that. So the short answer is he stood out as a community leader. Whether he was militant or not depends on the point of view, but he was not the only one. So he was not a soloist in these beliefs. He was definitely part of a chorus.
Rajat Sethi, was Hardeep Singh Nijjar an enemy of the state of India?
He was on the most wanted list in the NIA, which is India's top investigating agency against terror activities. There have been quite a number of terror cases linked to the concerned person. There were red corner notices, as I've already mentioned, against him, which is the highest possible alert which is being issued via the Interpol. There have been several communiques issued to the Canadian government several times in the past as well. But
did he have blood on his hands?
Well, yes. NIA has a detailed dossier against him, and on those grounds, he was considered as a most wanted terrorist by the Indian government. Look at his background. He was the president of the Khalistani Tiger Force, which was also a banned organization. He used to represent Sikhs for Justice, another banned terror organization as per Indian laws. All his antecedents, he was part of various programs which used to call for Hindu genocide quite openly. Therefore, I believe that there has to be a firm line between a call to violence and free speech. This is where Trudeau has slipped.
And so to answer Amandeep's question, could the Indian state have ordered an extrajudiciary killing in this case?
Well, the Indian government has categorically denied that. We very well know that this is not a Balakot incident, and any kind of a reference to Balakot incident is laughable. Government of India is amply clear that no such event has happened, and Trudeau coming in trying to preempt an investigation by coloring it, making a statement in their House of Commons from a position of power, if you come out and make a statement on an ongoing investigation, that is bound to color the investigation, and we are not too confident as to what investigation has been there, what has come out of that investigation. No such set of evidences have been shared with the Indian government, and this is absolutely an immature way of dealing with issues which have such an important international import. Therefore, I would want to only say that Indian government's position has been amply clear on this topic. And they have reverted with the same diplomatic posturing that Canada has been trying to show.
Amandeep Sandhu, your thoughts on this?
I would like to see the NIA dossier because the common people of the country haven't seen it. I would like to see a court having sentenced Nijjar for the crimes attributed to him. I haven't seen any court sentencing him. So it is up to the government to make any red corner notice they want to make and ban any outfit they want to ban. But this is diplomatic language, I understand that. It carries currency, I understand that. But is it really true? That we don't know. And that is, again, the Canadian government is saying that we want to pursue the truth. So I think Canada is within its rights to make that statement. And what Rajat just described, that we have been complaining to the Canadian government about hostilities, Canadian government has done the same thing.
Just a final point on this. Craig McCullough, was he considered a dangerous person? How did Canadian authorities view Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who had Canadian citizenship?
Again, as I mentioned earlier, he was not a soloist. He was part of a chorus of people who very much hold the same belief, maybe not to a militant level. But he was free to roam in the country. At one time, he was I believe at the time of his death, he was the president of the temple. He was well known. He was free to roam wherever he wanted. He was not known for being on the most wanted list. There was no extradition hearings scheduled for him to be removed from the country. And I've covered a few extradition hearings for the United States and from the People's Republic of China wanting people out. There was nothing like that. So there was no formal charges. There was no formal accusations. He was free to express his opinion. He walked around the country as a free man, and now is a dead corpse.
All right, past tensions, and you mentioned it, Craig, in India have come back to haunt Canada after the 1984 storming of the Golden Temple that killed hundreds, possibly many more. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated by Sikh members of her own security detail. That in turn sparked sectarian revenge killings the following year, and you alluded to it. Sikh militants were suspected in Canada's worst ever terror attack, the bombing of Air India Flight 182 from Montreal to London. All 329 aboard were killed. It's Craig McCullough, something that for Canadians goes a way back, especially because that Air India bombing, there was never resolution when it came to exactly what happened.
The investigation, according to the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the last time I talked to them, is still an active, ongoing investigation. One of the longest and most expensive trials in Canadian history, and one that I covered, was the charges against two individuals, a now deceased business executive and a gentleman from the interior of British Columbia. That trial went on for several months. They had to build a special courtroom. It's extremely high security, and both individuals were found not guilty. There was a gentleman by the name of Hardeep Singh Nijjar who was found guilty. He's the alleged or proven to be the bomb maker. What was put forward is that entire bombing, the entire conspiracy and the assembly of that was done here in the Greater Vancouver area. In fact, a lot of the coordination was done just a couple of kilometers over my shoulder. And we know that from information that the Canadian spy agency put together, that they, as it turns out, did not share with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And that was part of the controversy back then. But it was put on a connecting flight here in Vancouver. And there was actually another bombing within the same hour at Narita Airport in Japan, where two baggage handlers were killed. That was also part of the same terror campaign, the same effort. And the Air India flight that blew up over the North Atlantic near Ireland did take off from Eastern Canada. But it's still an open investigation, and it's still not closed, although one would reason as we move on from it, there may not be any more headlines, shall we say, or any more charges. But apparently it is an active investigation, and there is a memorial in Vancouver Stanley Park for it.
Amalindu Misra, are we talking about what's now history, or can we connect the dots between the events of the 1980s and today?
Not really, because what we have seen is that the Sikhs carry a big angst as to what happened to them in 1984. The rolling down of the Indian tanks into the sacred temple, the Golden Temple. And the Hindus also, or the Indians in general, have the angst that the Prime Minister was killed by two Sikh bodyguards, those who were supposed to protect her. And then you have the October pogrom against Sikhs in Delhi and elsewhere, where more than 3,000 innocent Sikhs were killed by the orders of the then government, perhaps. So there is a long line of grievance from both sides. And then we also have to talk about what was happening in the Punjab in the 1980s and 90s, when hundreds and thousands of innocent civilians were killed by Sikh terrorists. So when you put them all together, then you realize that a lot of angst is there between both the Indian state and the Sikhs. But having said that, the Sikhs in India, who constitute around 52% of the Punjabi populace in the Punjab, are generally not Khalistani sympathizers. It is the diaspora, the community that lives overseas, mostly in Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, and United States, who are sympathetic to this idea of a kind of independent and separate homeland. And since you have that angst, since they have the money, there is always going to be that friction between the mother state and the diaspora. And unfortunately, this is going to be an ongoing problem. And I don't see it being resolved anytime soon, given that this has become an international problem, especially what we are witnessing in the context of the diplomatic row between Ottawa and New Delhi.
Are you suggesting it's opening a new can of worms?
It is indeed, because India is trying to sort of enter into the global league as a major superpower. And the last thing it wants is its name being tarnished and damaged by any other government. That is something that is not acceptable. And that is the reason why we have seen in India, the opposition parties have all come together and huddled around the current government and have said that we stand shoulder to shoulder with what New Delhi is trying to do. But it is not going to sort of undermine the Indian government or any future government for that matter, even if it is not the current nationalist government, if you're talking about 1924 election.
Amandeep Sandhu, do you agree?
Yes, most of what Amalendu said about the grudges is correct. I just want to add a footnote to what he said, that there were thousands of extrajudicial killings in Punjab between 1984 and 1993, custodial deaths, which have, and they run into thousands. Two independent groups have compiled data. And right now, in the last few years, there has been some courts which have been saying that, okay, the Punjab police was involved. So that is also one of the angst that the Sikh community has. The other real larger problem is that before militancy and after militancy, and until now, Punjab, and that is what my book covers, has a lot of issues which nobody covers. You know, the center doesn't address them, the state governments don't address them. So there is a sense of disquiet in Punjab. It does not translate into the Khalistan movement. No, it does not. But there is disquiet. So now there are Sikhs in three categories. There are Sikhs who are in Punjab. There are Sikhs who are outside Punjab but in India. And they are also about 5 million Sikhs. You know, and then there are the Sikhs in the diaspora, which are around 3 million Sikhs. Now, when a migrant goes from India, many of them escaped in the 80s and 90s. And they carry a certain image of India in their minds. And they have passed it on to the next generation, which is the intergenerational trauma of boys like Nijjar. You know, but the other aspect of it is that they keep looking at Punjab and seeing, is Punjab solved? Is Punjab sorted out? But their own lives, and you know the life of any migrant, is full of hard work, keeping his family together, you know, building a home for themselves, taking care of their village back home. That is the life of a migrant. Not many of them have the opportunity to actually work for Khalistan or whatever. I consider it a bogey word. It has been used and bandied time and again. But it's a small, minuscule minority, even in these countries which are doing that. The Sikhs in India, there is disquiet. The Sikhs in the rest of India, and the Sikhs in Punjab, there is disquiet. The Sikhs in the rest of India, most of them, and I'm researching them right now, they don't say they want Khalistan. They actually want to be happy wherever they are located. They remember 1984. They don't want a repeat of those times. So when the media keeps talking Khalistan, 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 it is these Sikhs who have to go around explaining what is it about. And I think government should behave in ways in which its citizens are protected. Even the Home Minister on 23rd April this year went on record saying there is no Khalistan movement in Punjab. And yet the term again and again and again, this is what causes the Sikh community anxiety. You want to resolve something, give justice to people, help people develop. There is huge exodus from Punjab right now. Keep the boys here, give them jobs, but no, boys and girls. More girls are going now. But I'm saying that you need to address the social injustices, the legal injustices, what the Punjab police did in Punjab, and things will sort out.
So when we saw those big farm protests with many Sikhs front and center, Those were about farming and about the agrarian reform. Those were not about anything else.
No, they were not. But look at the Indian media in those days. Look at the Indian media in those days, constantly calling them anti-nationals. These are the people who fed India for 50 years. That was what the Green Revolution was about. And now they have become anti-nationals, they're Khalistanis, they're separatists. And the whole entire media of India, almost, the television media was doing that. Some print media was saying, until the farmers came up with their own media, their local media which challenged this other media. And finally, the farmers' narrative prevailed. The laws were withdrawn. But the government has not forgotten that. The center has not forgotten that. It considers it a snub. And since the protests got over, in the last 2 years, look at what all they're throwing at Punjab. Killing a popular singer gets killed, a new persona comes over for a few months, the government is not catching him, then they launch a huge manhunt in Punjab. It is while the G20 summit is still going on in Punjab.
Rajat Sethi. Rajat Sethi.
Well, I think we are, weaning away from the core topic.
The core topic is this. This is the core topic.
See, these are domestic issues. Every constituent have their own set of issues in our country, and there are legitimate ways of addressing that. What is not legitimate is that when you conduct referendums outside India, that calls for seceding part of India and questioning directly the sovereignty of the country, coming in the harm's way, putting India's diplomats, putting those posters out and baying for blood, baying for violence. That's something which is criminal and violent acts, all not just in Canada, but even in San Francisco. India's topmost diplomats' pictures were put on the walls as posters and asking violent acts to be done against them. Is that what a civilized state looks like? Or is that a civilized approach to your grievances? Certainly not. Look at what happened in a tabloid. The same Khalistani elements in Canada were celebrating the killing of late Prime Minister Indira Gandhi in a tabloid. They were recreating the shooting scene of the Prime Minister, which was unequivocally questioned by the Indian, not just the government, but even the opposition here in India. There has been consistent provocation from the Khalistani elements within Canada, and the Canadian government has been apprised of it over and over and over again.
Rajat Sethi, let me ask you on this point. Because one of the biggest criticisms I've heard leveled when I was in India speaking with people last week was that the Prime Minister, when there is violence directed against religious minorities, he doesn't condone it, but he doesn't speak out. He doesn't speak up to criticize it or to condemn it. Should Narendra Modi be speaking up more, and that would ease those suspicions and tensions that you describe?
Well, I can't comment on individual perceptions, what individuals carry. There are enough amount of data that the communal violences that used to be there, interreligious violences that were there, have been drastically coming down. The Prime Minister's job is to govern the whole country, whereas the law and order specifically lies within the realm of the state governments. State governments control the law and order of respective states. That's how our federal structure operates. And that's how respective state chief ministers have been addressing their state concerns. There is a proper way, and you need to speak to the right set of people to understand or perhaps educate your audience from another perspective as well. What I fail to understand right now is that a consistent question on India's sovereignty is ironically, when you listen to the Canadian foreign minister, when she comes in and says that they are going to protect the Canadian sovereignty tooth and nail, wherein on the same side they are also going out condoning, openly supporting, in the name of free speech, they are supporting all acts for direct call to violence, direct call for genocide of communal nature, targeting India's communities out by the Khalistani elements. I need to understand 2-3 things from Justin Trudeau. What has been the reason of the timing of this? Why did he not follow the due established procedures, sharing data, sharing evidences with the Indian government? and try and deal with it through the diplomatic routes. You go in with a bazooka, just trying to address your own domestic audience.
Which brings us back to what we were saying at the outset. Craig McCullough, again, this government source telling the Reuters news agency that, quote, Canada will share evidence on the killing in due course. Is that a legitimate point there from Rajat Sethi?
Well, in due course, we have to find out, what is that due course? How long is that? Is it a day? Is it a week? Is it a month? So only time will tell. But as I said earlier, the Canadian Prime Minister, and he's backed by all the opposition leaders, and I'll point out that the unofficial opposition leader is a separatist himself from the province of Quebec, all in agreement with the Prime Minister. He's not going to stand up and lie to the House of Commons. He simply won't do that going into an election. And as is pointed out before, he had a disastrous state visit to India a couple of years ago, whereas at one point him and his family stepped off a plane dressed in traditional South Asian outfits, and he was greeted by Indian government officials who were dressed like he is now in a Western suit and tie. So he's not going to gamble his political future. And if he has compared notes with the British government, with the American government, with the Five Eyes network, including Australia, New Zealand, and other countries, there is a lot of evidence. And there might be an ulterior motive as to why he did do that now. Maybe he's trying to push something along, so this due course, as is being talked about, is going to be sooner rather than later. And
Craig, you heard earlier Amalendu Misra talking about a diaspora sometimes that's got a more idealized version of what their identity is, or has a vision of what things are like back home that no longer corresponds to the reality. Your thoughts on that?
Well, that is quite possible, because we have a number of people in the South Asian community here in the Greater Vancouver area that are third, fourth, fifth generation Punjabi or South Asian. So their grandparents were Canadian. So you do have a lot of people who maybe haven't even been to India that are talking about a free Khalistan, a free Sikh homeland. And even those who were born there, they came to Canada. And although I have not had the fortunate opportunity to go to India, they're looking at it irrevocably and through no fault of their own. They're looking at it through the eyes of Canada. And, Canada's a country that, has its issues. We still have to do truth and reconciliation with our First Nations, for example. But Canada's a pretty good country that's pretty much got its stuff together. It's not perfect, but they're looking at it through Canadian eyes. Even though they may be very connected, they have family, they have friends, they have relatives, they read newspapers. I come from Scottish ancestry. I keep up with what's happening with the Glasgow Rangers from time to time, but I've never actually been there. So my point of view on Scotland and on Britain, which I have been to, England, is going to be different because I'm looking at it through the eyes here of Vancouver and these windows behind me that overlook the Greater Vancouver area. So there is a point in that, especially with second, third, fourth, and fifth generation people from the South Asian community.
All right, Rangers, not Celtic. Well, I've noted that, Craig. I want to ask you, it's obviously, it's not just a large Indian diaspora where you are in the Vancouver area. Canadian intelligence reportedly found evidence that Beijing actively canvassed to oust pro-democracy MPs. In the last election cycle, there have been several exposés about this story that have been written up, and it's members of parliament, but also local officials. Are we comparing apples and oranges here when we look at the diaspora's relationship with their country of origin, Craig?
No, as a matter of fact, when this conversation's been happening around the world here with you there in Paris, I was thinking about that because that's the other story that I've been covering as well. Basically, it comes down to foreign governments actively interfering in Canadian affairs. And let's be honest, again, we have the United States just over my shoulder. The Amazon and Microsoft headquarters are at less than 3-hour drive over my left shoulder that way. McDonnell Detweiler, which is a major contractor for the U.S. military, has had operations here in Vancouver. The Boeing aircraft is just down there. So obviously governments around the world have been maybe participating in Canadian politics, but not they haven't been accused of doing it nefariously. So the Chinese government is accused of coming into Canada and trying to manipulate the elections and our democracy to get favorable candidates, or at least candidates that haven't spoken out against Beijing elected. And that's highly offensive to Canadians, especially our veterans in the Second World War who fought for democracy and freedom. And now we've got a case where it's alleged that the Indian government has interfered in Canadians' day-to-day life, into our democracy, into our justice system, and has committed an alleged criminal act against a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil in a major Canadian city. So it's foreign governments interfering in daily life of Canadians in a nefarious way. If I go out there and I try to interfere in a municipal election, even if it's with a local parent advisory committee, I'm not a parent, but if I go to one of my cousin's schools, that will be in the headlines. That will be noted. So for a foreign government to try to do this, especially in the case of China, which is not known for being a democracy, is something. And of course, India is called the world's largest democracy. So it's even more surprising that it's still happening in countries that consider themselves to be democracies. So yes, long answer to your question is, yes, there is a comparison. It's nefarious interfering, allegedly, in Canadians' way of life, democracy, and system of justice.
Very quickly, because we're almost out of time, Amalendu Misra, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, the diaspora has always had a role in terms of what is happening in the mother country. Let's look at the Irish diaspora and the Northern Ireland problem all these years. Let's look at the Kurdish diaspora in Sweden, for which Turkey wanted to stop the inclusion of Sweden in NATO. So this is a long story. It is not going to end anytime soon. So diaspora is always going to have a role to play in the domestic politics of the mother country. And given that we live in an interconnected world, foreign governments taking an active role in another country's politics is going to become much more common in the days and months and years to come.
Yes, because it works both ways, Rajat Sethi. So how much of an impact will the diaspora have in next spring's elections in India?
India is proud of its diaspora and the relations they continue to enjoy. However, there have been few incidents which I have repeated, wherein direct call to referendum for seceding from India's territory is something which goes against all established international treaties, laws, as well as conventions. This is something that Justin Trudeau needs to control. And in words of Hillary Clinton, that if you rear snakes in your backyard, they won't just bite the target, they would bite you as well.
Final word on this from you, Amandeep Sandhu?
You know, again, referendum is a bogey term. Because if you go and look up the definition of a referendum, it is when a vote happens in an area where people are living next to each other. Here, there are 21 countries in the world. It is just a gimmick being played out by the Sikhs for Justice. And the kind of approach, if they really want Khalistan, which I doubt actually, but if the kind of approach they're taking is to actually engage in high-end diplomacy with foreign governments, not go around doing what they are doing there, the kind of vandalism sometimes they end up doing. But I must remind you one more time here that today the Australian government came up with another news. And that is that the vandalization of temples, Hindu temples, that happened in Australia before Prime Minister Modi's visit was actually done by within the community. The Sikhs were not involved, and yet it was blamed on the Sikhs. You see how demonizing of the Sikhs happens. The need is for conversation. The need is to solve Punjab's deep economic and political and social issues. And that is how you keep the people of Punjab happy, which is a border state.
Yeah, we're going to have to unfortunately leave it there because we're running very short on time. I want to thank you, Amandeep Sandhu. I want to thank Rajat Sethi for being with us, as well as Amalendu Misra. Craig McCullough, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.